Let's talk about something happening now, the H1B situation, with Trump adding this huge fee to it, completely redone as a program with different stuff.
Every opportunity you see, it's not a slam dunk again. Bangalore, with all its potholes, is waking up because some startup founder said he's going to move, and fixing the potholes is all it takes. We'll fix the potholes. I don't know how long it stays fixed.
With JSW Steel, and I think the company was Bhushan Steel and Power. And it looked like for a brief period of time that the Supreme Court had undone something that happened 5 years ago. The bankruptcy court into question itself. And that just got reversed.
We call the whole thing off 5 years later.
Let's go to the next one, which is also around regulatory risk, but in a very different way. It's about sometimes winning too much. And I think Dream11 and maybe even the crypto companies kind of fit this model, right?
In both these cases, things got too big. In Dream11, I don't know if it's possible to intentionally lose. I mean, even if you chose the worst players, you might still end up winning, right?
Dream folks, the company I know and most of us know as the people who sort of helped you get lounge access. Is this true? Like a small software glitch cost them basically their entire business? What's happening?
So the story here, Shri, is that
Hi everyone. It's been an interesting year. We're recording this on the last day of September 2025, and if you've been like us and most people we've seen investing, your equity returns are somewhat negative to flat over the past 12 months. It's also been a very eventful 12 months with many things we just never expected to happen actually ended up happening. So it's under that context that we thought we'd bring in Deepak today and talk about 5 examples or lessons of types of risk from stories from the past year to see what we can learn from this and see if there's other ways we can think about how to diversify and deal with risk going forward in our portfolios. So 5 risk examples, let's dive into it. So Deepak, one of the things that I think we were discussing when we were preparing for today's episode is, there are these single events that can happen that completely change how your portfolio, how a stock, or how something goes. And I think the example that you cited was Dream folks, the company I know and most of us know as the people who sort of helped you get lounge access or something along those lines. And it seems like is this true? Like a small software glitch cost them basically their entire business and the company might even shut down? What's happening?
well, not the company really, Shri. I think the idea here is that a majority part of their business came in from providing lounge access to customers of banks who own certain credit cards, and the lounges were guaranteed a certain, or not guaranteed, or were given a steady stream of customers that were coming in, and they didn't own the lounges. Of course, they didn't own the banks, but they were the go-between in that sense between people who are operating the lounges, which is typically the airport operators or something like that, and the banks, credit card companies who are saying, I want more credit card customers. I want to give them some kind of an incentive. Why don't I give them an incentive saying free lounge access to, airport lounges? So when you're in an airport, you're waiting, you want to go grab a refreshing meal or just something that you can pass your time in. Here's how you can go, and because it was considered a little bit premier, I can get access to a lounge for free. People would say, I'll buy this, I'll get myself this credit card. I might pay an entry fee, and that will give me some lounge access every time I go somewhere. All great, except there was apparently a problem, and there was a bit of a software glitch when they were having problems. Now, the way that it worked was that they would charge the banks a certain amount of money for every time people went to a lounge. So maybe that was 800 rupees. I don't know. The numbers are out there, and then the lounge would actually get a lower amount, and just for our sake, maybe 300 rupees or 400 rupees or something like that per customer. Now, the idea was that Dream folks was, setting up all the software and the linkages and all that stuff. So they would earn the money in the middle that would pay for their operations. Given that it's a low debt kind of an operation, no assets, so there's no need to have a lot of depreciation and so on. So you were the middleman, and once you got into all the airports in India, you became, you had a network of some size and, stuff like that. This is all great from a perspective of, I think, having a business, and you could analyze this business very well, right? So you could say, there are so many airports in the country, and you have so many people flying, and so many planes, and so many people have credit cards, and so you could accurately say, if credit card growth is 5% a year or 10% a year, and then that growth is 2% a year, and then you have so many people coming in, they pay, so I will earn 400 rupees per customer effectively as revenue. My costs are certainly fixed. fixed to a certain extent because I'm just managing the software and the linkages. So my profit becomes so much. It's easy to predict that 5 years into the future and 10 years into the future and all that. What you don't realize is that this complexity can change very quickly. You're dealing with a situation where you have the airport operators on one side who are fairly big. There's Adani, there is L&T, or the Bangalore International Airport Limited, which I think is a confluence of a bunch of
GMR.
people. Yes, and JMR and so on. And banks, which are very large institutions on the other side. You're in the middle of these two very large entities, well capitalized entities, and you are effectively earning a fairly reasonable chunk of the transaction value that's being paid in these cases. It's not a 1%, 2%, it is like 50% or 40% of this value. And when you have a problem, which apparently happened sometime, these people who went to these airport lounges were not able to access them. They were not able to get in, or whatever it was.
Because of some software issue
There
or
was
some
some software
outage
issue,
or
some
whatever.
outage or something. There was something that was fixed in 2 or 3 days, but for that time period, the lounges didn't see any inflows and saw a lot lesser inflows. And the banks also were like getting jittery because the customers are coming to them and saying, "You told us we'll get free lounge access and we're not getting it."
I'll complain to RBI.
Or whatever, So you're getting this problem. And then one of the airport operators, which is Adani, they own a significant number of airports in India, were like, "Listen, why are we doing this? Who is this player in the middle and what value are they providing? And if there's this software, obviously there's something wrong with the software itself, but more importantly, what does it take to replace them?" Start talking to the banks directly, and then they found out that, once you find out that, the bank's paying them 800 and I'm getting only 400 out of this. Why don't we make a deal where you pay us 600? So it's more than we are getting from the Dream folks, guys. And you're paying us less than what you're paying the Dream folks. Guys. So it's a win-win for us. But guess who the lose is? The guy in the middle who's like, wait, you can't get rid of us. And they said, well, maybe we can. And what do you do when you can't fight the guy who effectively gives you and who owns the lounge, right? At some point, and then you can't fight the Adani. And you essentially 93% of your business goes out the window because the airport lounges suddenly decide to refuse to work with you and work directly with the banks themselves. So the customer of the bank, the credit card customer, continues to get free access to the lounge because all they did was build another piece of software that just relatively simple piece of software, I guess, because obviously this is not...
Everything looks simple from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, from the outside. So it's probably easier to have to say this than to do this. But somebody built this software very quickly that kind of married the lounge to the credit card and put Dream folks, the intermediate guy, out of the business. Regardless of how much they must have had in terms of ironclad contracts and this and that, you got this tail risk of one big thing just changed and you were the go-between. So in a sense, it might be the equivalent of me saying, oh, well, you know what? There is a restaurant which wants to sell us food and I want to buy this food. And somehow Zomato or Swiggy come in the middle and say, I want 30% of this whole thing. And plus I want a delivery charge from me, and the restaurant's getting charged and me is getting charged. And perhaps there's a platform fee and I don't know, tomorrow there will be a breathing the air fee, whatever it is. So you could eliminate this if I start talking to the restaurant directly. But I am an unorganized guy. I don't have the time. I want some place to just go and get stuff. And me, perhaps as a slightly more, operationally, accessible guy, I can go to a restaurant and get food, or I can send someone to a restaurant to get food for me, which I do. And often I save, that 30 or 40%. The restaurant could also directly communicate with me, but restaurants are generally unorganized. They don't have the ability to reach a very large mass of people, and they have this problem. So as long as both of us are, that the customer and the supplier are unorganized, the guy in the middle makes a lot of money, right? And this is true as long as there's no competition. The problem in the airport sector is that your customer is organized and your supplier is also organized. So your bank is well organized. It's in a highly regulated business. Airports in a highly regulated business and well capitalized itself. So at some point, they don't like the fact that you're coming in the middle. and earning such a big spread. Now, if you were to earn like 2%, they'd probably be fine. They'd probably be like, who wants to replace this guy who's earning 2% or 5% or something like that? But when you're earning a significant chunk of that margin, they want to replace you. And the biggest businesses in the world have come out of this, whether it's Google, which earns advertising revenues, because most of their market is unorganized. The players that want to advertise are relatively small players, and even the larger players have seen the value of using not trying to replace a Google by themselves. At the same time, the small guys on the other end are. But the point over here is, this is a risk to a person who's investing in such a business without understanding. I mean, you could accurately predict. Like I said, you could go down to the microscopic thing on an Excel thing. Oh, I changed this number by 2%. My valuation changes by so much percent. You could make very precise kind of estimates going forward. The problem is, the downside is almost like shit. There's a switch that says, if I toggle it, this whole business becomes zero. You will never add that into your Excel sheet, saying, oh, there's this external risk of this whole business going down, right? So you're like almost like, no, these are smart people, they know what to do, we can't take this. But this happens, and this is a risk in your business. And so your problem as an investor is not even being, this is not even a corporate governance issue, it's just a plain competition issue. And the perfectly fine business one day, and perfectly not fine business the next day. It's like almost like a switch that kind of toggled it down. And I say that is your risk as an investor, is that sometimes these tail risks, these one-off events which happen, sometimes not even unpredictable. In this case, for instance, you knew of this tussle that was happening more than a month or 2 months while this was happening, until that final switch came in. So the other example is of Noida Toll Bridge, which is a company. It was a listed company, and it had rights to this bridge and to toll a bridge that it had built. Now, typically, this is infrastructure, so you're not allowed to like forever own this infrastructure, public roads. So you get a license to say toll. So this concession period, in a way, was part of this contract that was allowed to build this bridge, and that concession agreement had a certain IRR. You had invested so much money, you have to earn so much IRR on it, or 16% or something like that was there. And you have to earn the money back over a period of time. What happened was, this was built as a bridge, and it was listed, and it was owned by some of the most well-meaning funds in the country as well. So you could do very accurate estimations now, because this company would earn this revenue. It had a certain amount of that revenue it would pay to repair the bridge and so on. But by and large, the rest of it was profit. It was paying them out as a dividend. Dividends were tax free at this time, so you could evaluate, oh, I can buy this company, I'll get so much dividend. So many cars run every day. Delhi's growth is so much. So this traffic will increase by so much. Noida is developing at this place, and so on. What you couldn't see was the fact that the agreement had certain clauses that allowed them to recover the money in a certain period of time. They had already recovered that much money. You had no idea of whether this was not known to you. Subsequently, the Supreme Court saw this due to a case and said, listen, you've already done what you said you'll do. You already recovered what you said you was your investment, and the recovery time frame and the interest that you should have earned out of it. Why should you be allowed to toll this bridge again? Because it's now should be public infrastructure. There was no answer, and the toll was shut down. The toll was shut down, and the bridge became no toll bridge. It was a listed company. It went literally to not having a business the next day. Interestingly, the share price took at least a month or so to go down to zero and get delisted eventually and all that, or maybe even more than a month. But the business had gone to zero almost instantly, right? So you had all this analysis that you've done on this Excel sheet, and you didn't have the toggle switch saying, boss, I am not allowed to earn anymore. Since then, many other such toll bridges have been removed from operations. I think there was a Gurgaon toll bridge which was removed, and in Bangalore itself there's a toll bridge that leads you to the airport. That toll bridge was after the airport turn, so that means people who are going to the airport were not paying any toll. And this bridge was owned by the company that one of the SL group companies eventually was sold to somebody else. as part of that. They were desperate for capital at that time and so on. But this company was not allowed to toll people going to the airport when most of the traffic was actually going to the airport and not to Hyderabad. To So now there are two toll bridges, one at before the turn to the airport and one after the turn to the airport. So if you go to Hyderabad, you're actually passing through two toll bridges. Though I don't know if you're charged in both. I think if you're charged in one, you're not charged in the other, or something like that. But it's interesting because the if you're a person who's invested in this toll bridge, you're thinking, you're modeling all the traffic that's going to the airport, and they tell you that you can't have a toll bridge before the turn to the airport. You're almost like, wait. That's like 90% of my traffic. That's where I built the bridge for. And then now you're not allowed to. And, and so on. So these extreme binary events of I will not be allowed to toll is actually where I think where you have an investing problem into such a business. And this is, the problem of, I like it because it's accurate. I like it because it's precise, but you're searching for precision in a business that should not. The more sure a thing is, and therefore more precisely you can measure it, the more tail risk can come and hurt your business a lot.
I think if you were to try and abstract, the learning away from this is that if you see yourself getting very narrowly down, say, the assumptions and finally tuning this model and trying to predict what happens, maybe that's not where the alpha lies, or maybe that's not where the risk of this investment lies. It lies in none of these being meaningful in the first place. And so before you go down that rabbit hole, you should be like, oh, wait, am I not thinking about something else that I should be thinking about, more existential? Fair. I'd like to come to the second example. I think this one is more recent. It's just a couple of days ago, but it talks back to something that you've been discussing for over a decade, it seems. So I think the most recent example is with JSW Steel, and I think the company was Bhushan Steel and Power or something like that. And it looked like for a brief period of time that the Supreme Court had undone something that happened 5 years ago and was bringing in the whole, that in IBC, the bankruptcy code, into question itself. And that just got reversed. But what happened here, and what was the risk here?
So the story here, Shri, is that I think let me start from the core of what this bankruptcy act was. The idea of the bankruptcy act was to provide companies with a way to who could pay their debts to kind of say that, listen, we'll go through this bankruptcy resolution process, and there was two options: either resolve the company or liquidate. Now, if a company cannot pay its debt back, then you can only do one thing: you can sell all its assets, which is liquidation, and whatever you get, everybody shares in some proportion, the proportion of their how much of money they're owed. Or you resolve it by saying that somebody else is going to come and he's going to say, listen, I can't pay 5,000 crores that this company owes you guys. I can pay you only 2,000 crores. Will you take that? And after that, forgive the remaining 3,000 so that I can move on. And now the promoter cannot do this, because otherwise it would amount to the promoter getting a haircut on the debt that he only took, which they didn't want to do. And I'll go back to that. This is a story for later. But you essentially said that, listen, if you give me 2,000 crores, I'll forget about the fact that there was 3,000 owed. Now you're clean. Now you please start from scratch and do your thing. And then employees continue to stay employed. The assets can be used by the new buyer and all sorts of things. So very interesting way to say, close down this bankruptcy process. Now start afresh, and we've resolved this company, which is what JSW Steel did with Bhushan Power and Steel, where it said, listen, I want to bid so much money, and the promoters were like, we're taking away my company. Like, well, you couldn't pay the debts, you're gone, you're finished. So, well, what do you do now? And there was a bunch of money owed to the government. There was a bunch of money owed to a bunch of other people. Well, there was a resolution done. Now 5 years later, the Supreme Court decides in a judgment that was scary, to say the least, that this particular resolution did not exactly happen according to the technical standards that should have. Oh, you did this 2 years later, and you did this 1 year later, and you didn't inform this person in the exact time frame that you should have informed them. So there's not a technicality. We call the whole thing off 5 years later. And they call the whole thing off means what? They said, now liquidate the company. But JSW was like, hello, I put in money. I upgraded the plant. I did a bunch of things. So it's a new thing. It's not the old thing.
And it's
So
doing well, I guess.
It's doing well for what it is. And you can't just liquidate it now, because that means a loss of, because if you liquidate it, you're going to give the money back to whom? To the original, and apparently the government had some taxes owed on it, and the original promoter said a bunch of things. They went to court saying no, this wasn't right, and the Supreme Court decides 5 years later, and this is the level of uncertainty that is unpalatable, because you're almost like, excuse me, you should have, if you had these problems, why did you allow me to resolve it in the first place? You should have put a stop to that resolution right then I wouldn't have put all this money into the business. But you can't. So it was a scary thing, because they were undoing the resolution process. Instead, they could have said, listen, what is that problem? If there was a technicality, then pay a fine. Pay a fine that allows, maybe it was 100 crore of a fine. Pay that fine and we'll solve it. If there was an issue with certain things, yes, we could, but you can't just say, completely. That's what's scary, because now JSW as an investor into this company is almost like, why did I even get into this? I mean, I thought I was getting a clean company at the end of it. And everybody who's done, there are about 15 or 16 large resolutions that have happened, and maybe 400, 500 small ones. Suddenly, is it possible to undo all of them? And by saying that, oh, well, you didn't follow this exact technical procedure. So guess what? 5 years later, we're cancelling. 5 years later, you're cancelling the entire process. That sounds like a little crazy. And luckily, the Supreme Court's come back and said, well, sense has prevailed. We are not doing this. Where we understand that the process did have some technical challenges, but by and large, we should not derail the entire process of doing this. But think of it from a one event situation. I did everything right. I could have modeled the resolution plan in a perfectly accurate way. And yet, you have this extreme event of someone changing the rules right in front of your eyes. And it's happening, and we'll probably talk about how suddenly the US is doing X amount of tariffs and Y amount of H1B and this. But all of these are externalities which you couldn't have imagined maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And at the time that there was opposition to this resolution, the idea was the opposition to this resolution was done. And that's why the resolution was allowed. Versus a Supreme Court going back and saying, no, 5 years ago, no, we didn't know all of this stuff, but now we do. So now we're going to cancel it and reopen everything. I would say if it were favorable to the parties involved, then I would say yes. For instance, if you find out a person was sentenced to life for murder, and you find out 5 years later that he was not the person who was guilty, then yes, of course, go back and fix that problem, right? You can't, the jail can't go and come and say, excuse me, you reduced my,
that
base.
only happens in America.
Yeah, it only happens in America, I guess, because of the private jails. But you couldn't say that really, because there's a more moral question involved. But over here, I think it would serve the cause of justice to have done this 5 years ago in terms of stopping the resolution process, but not to have stopped it now. It doesn't make any sense to stop it right now. So I think that was another one of those.
Fair. But I think one thing I wanted to, this example I think has been resolved, hopefully amicably and in a way that we are all expecting. But something that you pointed out is people do have a habit of buying bankrupt stocks and hoping things turn around. And so maybe these are people who haven't heeded this lesson and are in fact betting on things going the other way.
This is the most amazing thing. Shrey, earlier, I'm talking about before 2016, before the IBC came into impact, the idea of a resolution was a company went to the bank and said, listen, I owe you 5,000 crores. Okay, I'm not going to pay you back. The bank would meekly say, okay, how much can you pay back, sir? And you would say, well, 2,000 crores. Fine, let's do this. Let us redo the debt down to 2,000 crores and let's continue business as usual. So the guy who's an investor into this company in the stock market is saying, oh wait, yesterday it had to pay back the bank's 5,000 crores. Now it has to pay back the bank 2,000 crores for free. So that means there's nothing else that changes. The bank just takes the hit, right? Yes. So let's buy this company because it's getting resolved. And if the resolution once you get even rumors that a company is getting resolved, you go and buy its shares. And even though its shares have been battered, think of it, a 5,000 crore company has to pay 500 crores per year in interest. A 2,000 crore debt company has to pay 200 crores a year in interest. So if I earn, say, 400 crores, I was bankrupt because I couldn't pay 500 crores in the interest component of the loans I owned. Today, if I earn 400 crores, I have to pay only 200 crores in interest. The remaining 200 crores is a profit. So I am now suddenly profitable by just reducing my debt, right? So why not? Why isn't this a good thing to buy? The problem was, obviously, that the lender was giving away the 3,000 crores, taking no equity in consideration because of a lot of other factors and all that. So the IBC changed this. The IBC said, listen, we're going to do something. First, we're going to transfer the company to a new owner. That means the ownership of the company changes. But how much of the company does this new person own? The answer is he can own everything because it's passed through the resolution process. You made the debt holders take a hit, so equity holders definitely can take a hit, right? And that's the idea. So you should write off. You can go to the extent of saying I can write off all the equity. The first set of resolutions, they didn't allow a write off of 100% of the equity. So they in Bhushan Steel, not Bhushan Power and Steel, but Bhushan Steel, which is a different company bought over by Tata Steel, they took a position worth 75% because that was max that SEBI allowed. 75% was owned by Tata Steel, and the remaining, they actually put in more money as preference shares, which, if converted to shares, would make them own some 96 or 99% of the company. So essentially, 100% of what the ownership of the company was in the stock market today was 0.8% or something of the company tomorrow. So is that worth, I mean, have you considered that when you value this company? The answer is mostly no. But the new rules after Bhushan Steel were you can write off the equity to zero. And because I'm a relatively new person in the stock market, I was looking at this IBC and saying, "Listen, this means these stocks are going to go to zero." So I was going around on Twitter like a buffoon, perhaps, saying, "Why are you guys buying these companies? The resolution plan does not mean this. That means you will lose money. The guy who comes in will probably write down this equity to zero, and you will be worth nothing." But the stocks were making upper circuits, and people were saying Deepak Shanai is stupid. And perhaps I thought, what am I doing wrong over
What
here?
am I missing here?
Then I realized the problem is the investors of the past didn't see the IBC as this game-changing thing. And Monetis Path, which was, I think it went to zero, and then a few other companies like this that went to zero. And the problem was that the resolution plans had in one particular case in DHFL. I remember because DHFL was this financial company, one of the first financial companies to go through a bankruptcy process. It had a bunch of bonds. I had ownership of one of these bonds, and I was part of the resolution process. And somewhere along the line, I saw when it became final that there were only three resolution plans. The company was announcing all these news. All the resolution plans said we intend to write down the equity to zero. And so I said, listen, this is a warning to everybody that even if this company does get resolved, the company's current share is worth zero because all of this current share will be written down to zero and the new guy will come and buy it. Piramal did buy it in the end. They did mark down the share to zero. But that was the point. They said, listen, we are not going to buy this company unless you allow us to mark the share down to zero. I don't want to give current shareholders anything. I want to take something off of the current debt holders as well. So first equity loses everything, then debt loses something, and then I come in, right? So then I own all of the equity going forward, which is fair. That's how a bankruptcy process should be. If you're an individual that goes bankrupt in India, even today, even though they say there's a personal bankruptcy law, which I haven't seen ever, and you go to a bank and say, listen, I can't pay back my loan. I have a 1,000 rupee loan. The bank can say, listen, as long as you have a breath in you, as long as you're living, I can go back after you and take back this 1,000 rupees from your future income, whenever you earn income in the future. This sounds miserable because tomorrow, let's say I own 10 lakh rupees, I owe 10 lakh rupees. I go to a job, I get 10 lakh rupees into the bank, and the bank says, listen, you owed us 10 lakh rupees, we're taking it all off, it's zero again. So, that means forever I'll be earning for the bank, right? So, there is no way for me to ever get rid of that. Bankruptcy is the protection act. It allows you to protect yourself from and your future income by saying, listen, we'll ring fence everybody from anything going forward from here. Please choose this. America has a law of personal bankruptcy where they say you can keep your current residence because your primary residence is not bankrupt. It's bankruptcy protected in that sense. Your PPF is bankruptcy protected, but everything else can be used as assets that you own. The banks can acquire them, sell them. But if you owe 10 lakh and your assets are only going to give you 6 lakh rupees, the banks have to take the 6 lakh and then write off the remaining 4 so that tomorrow you can start earning from zero and all that earning is yours. So the person who's investing in these companies, somehow has thought that, listen, there's no concept of bankruptcy in India, meant that, oh, banks have to take that hit. The company can continue as it is. But the answer was it was not. So the change in the rules implied an extreme risk from what it was earlier. Many commentators, sometimes, I think it was a very unfortunate situation where I came after one commentator on TV, and I was like, listen, please don't buy all these NCLT companies. They're all going to go to zero. Please don't, just save your hard earned money for this stuff. And the guy before me had apparently said the exact opposite, which was like, oh, these NCLT companies, they're going to get resolved. So they're great opportunities to participate in their future growth. And then I hadn't heard what he had said. So I had no idea what he had said. So it turned out that, the anchors are looking at me with this strange face of, I mean, I don't know what to say to you, because that guy seems older, has more gray hair. But sometimes,
Well, now you're the one with grey hair.
I know.
So,
Yeah.
we'll
So
see how this-
I'm going to be the guy making stupid statements. But yeah, I mean,
your
it
point is-
sounds.
So regulatory regimes change, and this is a risk that you need to be aware of, and you can't keep extrapolating the present to the future or just past patterns into the future. That's fair. Let's go to the next one, which is also around regulatory risk, but in a very different way. It's about sometimes winning too much. And I think we said Dream11 and maybe even the crypto companies kind of fit this model, right? So real money gaming and crypto.
Yeah, this is actually quite interesting because, okay, think of this. You have a person starting a business. The person comes from a business family, among the most well-renowned business families, has access to capital, has amazing investors, a great foresight, vision, rests his laurels on the fact that he's actually not creating a gambling product, because he actually got a skill. He's saying, listen, there's a great product, which is the Indian IPL and the concept of cricket. People want to be able to create fantasy teams, fantasy football, fantasy, which is already famous in the US and in Europe and all that stuff. So you have a team that you could create of your own. And then if you created the right kind of team, because based on the actual product that based on the actual underlying cricket match that is there, whichever person actually performed, if that person was on your team, then you get a certain amount of your money back. So you invest, you build a team and you say, I'm betting, I don't know, 100 rupees on this team.
And then based on some outcome, you'd get, based on how well you've judged it, you'd get a
Yeah, you
profit.
get back maybe 120, maybe 130, and sometimes it's different. So there is a little bit of skill involved in understanding which person is good and all that stuff. So obviously, and there was a ruling by, I think, some court, which talked about the fact that such a game is not gambling. It's a skill-based game. So because if it's a skill-based game, and there was the reason it was done was to differentiate between poker and slot machine and lottery and all that. So lottery is gambling, but poker is not quite, and all that stuff. Using this rule as a precedent, we had everything that was going well for this, and it got immensely successful. So did crypto to some extent, because crypto, there was exchanges, Bitcoin, some other coin, Dogecoin, random coin being traded all the time. They are still being traded all the time. You could argue that both of these are still games of skill. However, in both these cases, things got too big. Crypto first, when it got really, really big, people in the real rural areas were spending all their time betting on some random crypto websites, which weren't exactly regulated, right? So you could argue that, oh, well, you know what, so is the stock market. But the stock market's a well-regulated entity in the sense of there's a SEBI, there's a bunch of exchanges, there's brokers, there's participants. All of these companies and entities have to play by certain rules that are created for the benefit. They have to be transparent. They have to talk about things. They can't randomly charge fees. They can't, if they do certain bad things, they go to jail, things like that. There is no such equivalent in crypto. Crypto is like I can cheat you, and you know what? That's a good thing. You have the honor of having been cheated by me, and in the crypto world, that's almost like
Badge of honor.
Badge of honor, yeah. So if you had that as part of the process, but there are people who are coming in who really don't think of losing money as a badge of honor. Then suddenly, in the rural areas of India and the semi-rural areas, if you're taking away so much of their mind space, the government doesn't like it. So they went after crypto in a big way and put a law that said, oh, if you do this. So they cut out all they made almost all the crypto businesses unprofitable overnight by a rule that kind of said it's taxed. You have to pay 1% fee for every transaction, 30% tax on any profits are earned. All of this has to be deducted at source. The crypto exchanges in India almost was a death knell for them, and eventually, they had hacks happen that kind of took their money out of them, but eventually they lost
But
the plot.
real money, which is the other half of the coin, managed to survive even this harsh taxation.
Yes. So real money gaming, interestingly, is taxed heavily, but the issue wasn't they weren't bringing it down because of taxation. The idea here was that now everybody's playing Dream11, and in the sense of
I
it's
mean, it was the
becoming
best, I
bigger. It's
believe. Yeah.
bigger than even the F&O
Biggest
market, if
brokerages.
you
Yeah,
will,
yeah.
and there were more like 35 crore people playing this on a daily basis and all that stuff. It became a social problem, which eventually became a political one, right? So at some point, you became too big, and because when you're too big, look at like IPL. The guys who manage the cricketing infrastructure of India are politicians to a large extent, right? So it was there from the Sharad Pawar days to now to Jay Shah. And, I mean, they're political entities who manage it because there is a thing that's saying if there's no regulation around it, then it has to be politicized. But at some level, Dream11 couldn't be. It was a corporate entity that had investors. For the politicians, writing it off was relatively easy to do because no politician would be harmed meaningfully, but also because it was a social problem that was reaching a point where it was creating very little difference between what was actually happening and gambling. So every day people would go randomly create teams and say, oh, let's bet 100 rupees, let's bet 200 rupees on this. And there was no, like in the US, there's a gambling commission that requires a certain set of odds where the customer, so you cannot create a slot machine where people lose all the time. They have to have some good odds of winning. And over time, you have to pay out a certain percentage of what you earn, regardless. So those rules aren't set in stone in the Dream11 world, right? So because it's like, oh, if everybody bets 100 rupees, can everybody lose 100 rupees? Possibly, yes. So, for instance, one thing that the Dream11 could have done was to go uplift themselves and make gaming commission kind of rules where you would get the government involved in building a framework that said, listen, a minimum of so many people have to win, a minimum of so much, my minimum bet is now 500 rupees, so that I remove all the small betters out of the existence. So you could do that, but you would harm your own business. But maybe better to have harmed your own business than to reach a point where the government harms your business in a big way. That's what happened, I think, in a Dream11 cycle. And at some point, it's the investors in these companies that suffered. It was not like, to a guy who's playing Dream11, if Dream11 is not the next day, he's looking at it as entertainment or gambling in that sense. He doesn't care too much. It's not, if it was a game of skill, there would be people who would have bet their careers on this stuff, but they don't. And part of that reason perhaps is because the rules are not so well defined that they could, for instance, if you started to consistently win, that's the idea of a skill is, maybe the view of a skill, and Anup has written this in an article, is, can I intentionally lose?
I remember this. Yeah.
In Dream11, I don't know if it's possible to intentionally lose. I mean, even if you chose the worst players in
The way
what
it
you
would be
think,
priced. Fair.
the way you might still end up winning, right? So at that point, the game becomes more a game of luck than a game of skill. And if it is a game of luck that you're betting on, that becomes what gambling is. And perhaps that is why you don't have people who are career Dream11 winners. There are people who are career stock market winners, and they've done really well. And we want to be in that space ourselves
hope to
as
one
well.
day be
Yes.
one of them. Yes.
So, but our long term thought process here is that there is a lot of skill involved. There's a lot of information involved, and thought process like that. There are career poker players who consistently win because the poker games are designed so that people can win a long-term thing. I don't think there was any such thing in the Dream11 framework.
But I think the real risk here, as you're pointing out, is sometimes you may be doing everything right, but that could be the problem. And maybe that might even happen with things like futures and options, because SEBI keeps every couple of years coming out with the paper saying, hey, there are too many people losing money on this. So if at one point they follow through on these rumors, which are right now just rumors, right, that they do introduce some fairly crippling thing, You can't say, oh, I didn't see this coming,
Yeah,
and
I
now
mean,
why
I'm
are my
telling
brokerage stocks doing badly
in
and
fact, this is
whatever.
no longer a black swan. It's a
Yeah.
white swan. You can see it. It's happening right now, and we can see the risk in front of us. So if you're betting on a company on its past earnings based on the fact that it made a lot of money on F&O, the chances are you're ignoring the risk. For instance, I can model saying, oh, F&O will go up 4% a month, and so many contracts, so many this. But all that is moot, because the government can come and say, listen, you're not allowed to earn so much money
If
out of
yeah.
the misery of, say, X amount of people and so on. But the same thing applies to pretty much anything that seems like a like a slam dunk. There was a point in the 1970s and 80s where there were these two brothers called the Hunt brothers. I forget their names, but they
Oh,
came
you had
from a
shared this the silver example.
silver example. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a point at which gold was going up, but silver was not. And these people said, listen, silver is as valuable a commodity as gold. So why don't we spend all this? They had a lot of money that they had earned from, I think, the gold and the prospecting businesses, and that they had. The family took that business. The brothers went and bought as much silver as they could everywhere in the world. And I think it went from a few dollars a troy ounce to $50 in 1980. I mean, it's about that price now, a little bit more than that. It crossed that a little while earlier, but imagine in the 80s to have seen that price go up 20x and all that stuff. The Hunt brothers were buying silver like it was going out of fashion. They were going crazy on silver. And guess what happens? Silver deposits are available in the world. They're not as
Rare as gold,
rare
I
as
guess.
gold is, but it is just unprofitable to mine that silver when the prices of silver were $2 an ounce. But at $50,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it became profitable to mine them. So when silver supply started to increase, the price of silver obviously adjusts to the supply. So imagine someone was able to somehow find new deposits of gold. Would gold prices continue to go up if it was not as rare as it was? Lab grown diamonds. Suddenly, when natural diamonds, are no longer the only source of getting diamonds, that you could grow a lab grown diamond that looks exactly like it.
And it's
Supply
better.
of diamonds,
I
yeah,
believe is better.
or in many cases better. So you would have access to a product where the supply is increasing and can increase substantially. So the price of diamonds naturally falls. But also, the price of silver fell so dramatically that the Hunt brothers went bankrupt. So too much of a good thing, perhaps, ends up in becoming a bad thing as well.
Now, we've all the things we've talked about so far, examples have kind of played out. Although I know Dream11 is, for instance, pivoting into wealth management and all that, but the thesis or the risk has sort of been understood and articulated by you. Let's talk about something happening now that many people have asked you your thoughts on. The H1B situation, with Trump adding this huge fee to it, perhaps it being completely redone as a program with different stuff. I was reasonably involved. My first job was on an H1B visa in the US. I was working for a bank, JP Morgan. So that was the very first job I got. And that was the recession. So I managed to get it without the lottery. But where I was going with this is that I never realized that I always thought it was the big Indian companies that were the ones using a lot of these visas. But when I looked at the analysis from last week, what I didn't know was that the big US mega caps like the Microsofts, the Facebooks, Amazons, and Googles of the world, they're actually perhaps even bigger or at least as big on the users of these visas. So I guess what I wanted to ask you is, this is a risk, sort of everyone has been talking about this for many decades, but maybe first opening up before we just make it about the risk that comes from this. What is happening here? How do you see this playing out? And maybe then we'll tie it back to
Where it is, yeah. So interestingly, the US had a bunch of visas. They wanted workers to come in, but they didn't want them to migrate here, right? To migrate to the US, right? So they had this non-immigrant visas called H1Bs. There even a tourist visa which is non-immigrant, which is a B1, B2. H1B is just a form. There's H2B and a bunch of things. The idea was to create workers on a temporary basis to fill in for jobs which people couldn't find American workers to do. That was the idea. Let me put this way, that it also created a feeling of indentured labor. I would say that even Dubai has such visas where you're indentured labor, where you're tied to the employer, in the sense if the employer throws you out, you have 30 or 60 days or something like that, and you have to find a new job, and otherwise you leave the US. Now, a lot of problem was created because Indians started to believe that the H1B was a path to immigration. which means you worked for 3 years, you renewed the visa, got another 3 years, and then you, by somewhere in the middle, you applied for a green card, and then you went through this long, winding, crazy time
Decade
process.
long
So I
thing.
don't
Yeah.
know how long it took, but you could continue to stay in the US and you became an immigrant. So when you thought of it as I am moving my roots to America, you're saying I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to go EMI, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to have a family, put them in schools. So you're actually uprooting yourself and moving what is a temporary, supposed to be a temporary employment situation into almost not right now, I'm temporary, but I'll become permanent at some point. So you've uprooted yourself, you've created a new life for yourself in this place. And maybe that was the risk. And what has happened over time is, as America has gotten older, as AI has taken over a lot of jobs, I think the job situation in the employment part of the universe for the US, for US residents, including, by the way, uh, second generation immigrants, or even people who have got their green cards. You find a lot of Indians, for instance, saying, oh, good, they're shopping H1Bs. Although they went there on
Yeah,
H1B
you got it.
themselves.
Yeah.
It's almost like, excuse me, hello, how can you do this? But it's like, oh, no,
They
now you're
close the
taking
gate
away.
later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't take
Yeah.
away my job now. Right? So
Okay.
at some level, that is
But it's a
also
lot of
happening.
people. But go
Yes.
on. Huh?
But it's a very interesting dynamic, because what's happening is, because the naturally this thing has been happening. It's, I think, from 2016-17 onwards, the Indian IT companies have been really recognizing that this is going to work against them at some point. Though they were the biggest applicants maybe in the decade earlier, they slowly started reducing their dependence on H1Bs by doing two things. First, offshoring more work into India, because it was difficult to get people in, and second, employing domestically local people for the people that they were employing in the US, to reduce this onslaught. So at the same time, as offshoring increased, even companies like Amazon and Microsoft were building India centers and India development centers and so on. This part, I think the H1B visa has a complex interplay here. When you build an Indian office, when you're Amazon or Microsoft, you're first thinking, I'll set up an office and make them do my accounting and back end
Simple
stuff.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
simple work. And then you start to do
More
slightly
and
more
more.
smarter stuff. Then you realize that there's some people over there that in India that are really smart. They've worked for you a couple of years maybe. Then they've really well contributed into this. You want them as part of your core team. But you know what? My core team sits in America, and I don't want to really move my core business out of America. I want all my core business to be geographically unified. So in the US, so I want them to work in the same time zone. I want them to work alongside my people and so on. So I sponsor their H1B visas. So Amazon became 10,000 H1B visas last year or something like that. It's not necessarily because they're cheap. They may be cheaper for the same skill set, because as skill sets increase, people pay a
Or at
lot of
least
more
that's what
money.
people have said. I
People
mean,
have said, but it's possibly that they're not really expensive. They're not really cheap. They're not at the $60,000 level either. So I think to that extent, the things start moving into people. Now, what happens when these people come into America? They come to America and they start assuming that this is going to become an immigrant thing at some point. So they set up root over there, they pay taxes, they spend over there, and so on. But now that you introduce this barrier for H1B, and I think it's fair, because all these countries will eventually get there. And as an Indian, I personally feel that, and I'll tell you why I think I personally like it. But as in the restrictions, is that now these companies will still need the people, but they won't be able to get them to the US because expenses there, and you don't know whether this is the H1B visa itself. And like you, I was offered an H1B visa in 1997. I decided not to take it because I wanted to start my first business. And I realized that an H1B visa doesn't allow you to start your own business until you move into this green card business, which can take a long time. And then I was like, dude, no, I want to start my own business. How can I? So can I don't care about living in the US. So I stayed back here. I came back to India at that time. And I was like, I don't want that indentured thing of saying I'm tied to this employer, I can't move and all that. But if you have smart people in India, or not, you
we
have
already
smart
have
people,
enough smart people in India.
in India and all that stuff, right? And you do want to hire them and take them. Uh, this extra fee that you've added into the process means that it's now going to be, even if they move there, that they're going to have to see who else. I mean, for instance, if I want to move a job, I was hired from Microsoft, and for some reason, I hate my manager, and I want to move to some other company. Does that company have to pay $100,000? Does it reduce my chances of even being able to take another job? Oh, if I buy a house and do an EMI, and Microsoft decides to fire me because of whatever, for whatever reason, I have 60 days to get out of the country and uproot my life and somehow pay an EMI. If I'm a student, I've taken a student loan and gone to the US. I will never be able to get a job in the US. So if I'm not capable enough to take a loan, should I even go to the US in the first place to study? Because I'm not going to be able to earn that money back in the US, and it doesn't make sense to try and come back here to make that loan. So unless I'm rich enough, I shouldn't go. These are questions that I think are occurring in people's heads right now. But at the same time, the American companies themselves are like, listen, if these people can't be brought over, geographical unity is optional. Maybe we can do things on Zoom calls and stuff like that. Why don't we just keep them there? And we can have a team that's sitting in India doing smarter stuff and or different stuff that I would otherwise have not normally outsourced out. But now that the people are there who can do it, I can outsource those tasks out to India as well. What happens now is the same people that would have otherwise gone there become pay taxes in India, spend in India. They build the Indian ecosystem. They even maybe they as they look for more opportunities, like me, if they want to start up, they go and start up their own businesses. And a lot of people have already done that. People who
And
come out
there's
of
so many IPOs happening. I've lost track. I mean, what
of,
an
of
incredible
these.
opportunity, and many of them are now companies we use and can relate to, as opposed to IPOs in the past where like, what do these guys
What
do?
do these guys even do? Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they do serve the US market, right? So here you have a market to serve. You have the technology and the talent that's being built up, and these outsourcing, or more outsourcing is creating more opportunities, and that mushrooms builds a bigger opportunity set here. I don't think this is what America intends to do, is to build up India because of this, but I think it'll get built up because of this. Now, here's where
So my question is, should we therefore be buying like flats near tech parks or figuring out how to get a REIT exposure to a tech park rental? What do you think we should do?
this is interesting because now I think the risk is the other side. Because now your risk is, if America introduced all these rules out of the blue, can they take them off out of the blue as well? Or can other countries come in and say, listen, fine, America doesn't accept you, but we also have a great standard of life. Come and work with us. So you're not getting that benefit of that opportunity. So every opportunity you see, it's not a slam dunk again. There is a potential that India, I mean, Bangalore with all its potholes is waking up because some startup founder said he's going to move, and the neighboring state's chief minister said, come here, we will give you free
And then Bangalore
X
said
land.
nothing doing, we'll fix
Bang,
this
we'll
damn
fix the
thing.
potholes.
Yeah.
If fixing the potholes is all it takes, we'll fix the potholes. We don't know how long it stays fixed, but
Let's see
at
what
some
happens.
point, if there is the risk that somebody who's considering coming here is saying, no, I don't want to come here, I'll go to Dubai instead, or I'll go to Singapore instead, or whatever. But there is that externality risk. There are no slam dunks, and at some point, while it looks reasonable, you need a layer of uncertainty to be able to profit meaningfully from it. I think when it becomes a slam dunk is when I start getting, oh my god, there's something I haven't seen in this.
So I think there's no such thing as a sure thing, which is why you always need diversification, which is why you need to have multiple bets, realizing some of them may not play out, even though everything in your body tells you that this is going to work out, and it's worked out for decades and it'll continue to work out. I agree. So now these are all examples that came from you. There's one that comes from me. So over the weekend, I read this article. It was one of those lunch with the FT interviews with some hedge fund manager in Europe, and there the article talked about a paper which this fund manager keeps referencing, where he says that it appears that every time you add $1 to the stock market, permanently, this must be the US stock market, the value of all stocks kind of permanently goes up $5 as long as that $1 is here. So in other words, the act of adding new money is moving prices up completely. So why does this matter? Apparently it matters, as he said, is so what happens when they start pulling it out? And this got me thinking of a couple of things, which was that, well, look, in India, we haven't really had some endlessly rising stock market. It's been a pretty tough year for most of us, I would say. Anup, you were said that the median stock is down year over year. You can come into on that. But I guess the question I have is, I'm a huge fan of passive. You're also quite a fan of passive in its own way. And even today, there are portfolios we offer both in our PMS and others, where a large part of customers' money is going into passive instruments, and it's worked wonders. But does this mean that if for some reason money were to start leaving the stock market, things could fall quite a bit even more? If not India, global, you can take this in any direction. Or does it mean that when things fall, passive could fall even more than, say, active? What's your take on this?
Oh, yeah. In fact, this is something I tweeted about this. a 1% fall, 1% change of ownership in a stock can result in 5 or 6% fall in that stock, because most of the stock is held by people who are not selling or buying at any given point in time. So 1% seller doesn't mean there's a 1% buyer. It could be disproportionately large in terms of a fall. And and the more the holding that is not participating, say promoters or certain institutional funds, the more likely it is that a small movement of ownership of a stock can cause a large deviation in the stock price. Right? So in that sense, if more money comes into stocks which are heavily owned and nobody is selling, the stock market will go up even more. So 1 rupee can result in a 5 rupee increase in market cap, which is quite remarkable, because you're thinking, oh, only 1,000 crores came in, the stock market went up 10,000 crores. How can 1,000 crore inflow result in a 10,000 crore increase in market cap? Because one is a flow, one is a stock. The market cap can change. But the same thing can happen in the reverse direction. And it's happened in COVID when people were running helter-skelter on liquidity. A small amount of money was pulled out of markets, and look, the markets fell 40%. And again, in Lehman, I think Lehman went bust and caused a hole in the financial system. That hole caused liquidity to be sucked out. And during the sucking out of liquidity is when people just exited out of all sorts of markets. The FIIs then exited less as a percentage of the market than they probably have today. And yet, the market at that time fell nearly 60 or 70%. Whereas now, even though we've had large amount of foreign investor sales, we've fallen like maybe 2% on the index or 3% on the index level. And the median stock today is down substantially more. Median stock out of 750 is down 9%. This is what Anup told me today morning. And this is September 30th, 2025. So that just to give you an idea. And then 67% of the market, 2/3 of the market is actually below zero, as in for the year, for the last 1 year. This is quite remarkable for something that is so widely understood as a market that seems to be okay. It's not really okay on the inside. There's maybe a few stocks that are leading the rally, but that's true of America as well. I think the top 7 there are leading it. And part of it is passive, because as more flows come into passive instruments, they just buy the most heavy weighted stocks in those indexes. America is seeing a lot of passive inflows. India is seeing a lot of passive inflows, and that's going in. When do passive flows go out? The answer is perhaps related to who is buying these passives and when do they need liquidity. What if the passives are being bought by people who need the money after their retirement? When they do retire and they need less and less of equity, and they need to move out of equity at some point,
either into debt or to spend it.
You end up with a situation where the money starts getting pulled out of these passive funds along with the actives, right? And as active becomes lesser and lesser as a percentage of overall flows, there aren't enough inflows in actives to counter the outflows in passive. That means the passive is going and selling Amazon. There has to be enough active managers to say, listen, Amazon's falling, I want to buy it. But when more and more people are doing passive, the flows out of passive are overwhelming the active guys saying this, right? So the disproportionate fall can also happen correspondingly.
This is like that guy who said passive investing is communism or something horrible. Yeah. I can't remember who said that.
It doesn't happen. And like I said, I think it's a tail risk that we're not seeing. And in fact, it's obvious that mathematically that would be the case. But almost everybody is like, listen, this can't happen.
It's a logical extreme.
Yeah. But I would say with Dream11, with Dream folks, with Noida Tollbridge, it's a logical extreme that happened. And we should be aware that logical extreme is a possibility. And there is no way to counter it, to say that I will protect myself against, other than diversification, even beyond maybe stock markets, maybe into commodities, maybe into debt and into other asset classes. That's the way to diversify away anyways. So I would say your tail risks are in this passive falling scenario is there is no equity place to hide. But there will be places to hide in the non-equity world. Today also, I think overnight rates in the US or short-term rates, 3-month rates are 5%. 5% is more than what you would make in dollar terms than any time in the last decade.
It's last 2 decades.
Last 2 decades. Maybe I don't know about 2 decades, but maybe, 2006, 2007.
Yeah.
So we're roughly around there. it almost sounds like this is an extreme. Why aren't more people putting their money into these really, short-term funds or money market funds, if you may, and earning this 5% rather than giving money into equities? Luckily, equities are doing well, but what if equities were falling to a rate where this 5% suddenly starts to look attractive, and then will you see the same kind of flow? But I'm not so worried about this, because this would be a market risk, which I'm not. I think the risk is more around people needing to take out money without a reason. They're not making economic reasons that I actually need the money to spend. That is when you'll have this economic damage coming from passive flows. But I would say, in general, active funds have become less and less popular in the US. In India, they seem to be quite popular because the passives haven't performed quite as well in comparison. Maybe that situation will change. Hopefully, it doesn't, because we want to be active. But there will always be enough active managers, at least in the next decade in India, at least, I think, that will continue to perform or outperform, simply because our market will take that much more time to evolve into that state. So maybe we are further down that road. Plus, India has a lot more young people. America has a lot more older people. America turns 50 plus in a few years, maybe in a decade or so. India only turns 30 plus at median age in the next 2 years. So the 30 plus age is interesting, because um, when a country turns 30, typically, we've seen about I have three examples in the past that shows that that country has an interesting period of prosperity post. Maybe other factors impact, but Japan, 1977 is when its median age turned 30. It was great economically till 1989. Since then, it hasn't been so great economically. America turned 30 in 1983 or 1984, and 15 years after that, till 1999, there was a good steady stage of growth. China turned 30 plus in 2003, and it's done fairly well for itself in the last 2 decades. We turned 30 plus in 2 years. So I'm excited about this opportunity, because I think it's interesting from a tail risk on the upside rather than the downside. And where we are right now, I think, seeing that as much outflows are happening from foreign investors and are getting countered by inflows from domestic investors, markets remaining roughly the same, is there a chance that the foreign investors stop their selling? I don't even want them to buy, but let's say they just stop their selling. The markets being overvalued as they are, perhaps, are probably going to get even more overvalued, almost defying that principle. So flows seem to matter a lot more than fundamentals in the near term.
Right. So thanks, Deepak. So as I think through the theme that connects this all, it's like things that are completely existential or that you never think can happen do seem to happen all the damn time. And keeping that in mind, make sure that you're well positioned no matter what version of the future exists, whether it's just diversification across stocks, within stocks, both active, both passive, maybe different asset classes. Have all of these going on, because you never really know what is truly going to happen. And as the world has taught us over the last year, sometimes very strange things happen. Although I have to say, if after all this, you're saying in 6 months, the US may come and suddenly become welcoming to Indian job hunters, I'll be damned.
I know. I think there's no sure thing in investing, and there's no absolutely totally unsure thing in investing as well.
Fair. Thanks, Deepak.
Thanks, sir.
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully. Past performance may or may not be sustained in future and is not a guarantee of any future returns.